Do you spend hours in your head thinking about something that happened, could have happened, or might happen? Do you ask others what to do so you don't make a mistake? Welcome to the Playing It Safe podcast. I am Dr. Z, your host. I am a clinical psychologist, an author, and a person that is super passionate about sharing with you science-based skills to overcome any type of fear-based struggles. Who doesn't experience fear? Who doesn't play it safe? In this show, we will discuss how fear-based reactions happen in day-to-day life, how playing it safe behaviors look like, sound like, and feel like, how you can put into action solid tips from behavioral science to get unstuck from worries, fears, obsessions, and anxieties, and how you can start doing what works, what matters, and what you care about. Behavioral science doesn't have to be boring. Thanks for listening, and let's get started. How do you respond to stressful, difficult, and challenging life experiences? What do you do when you encounter setbacks? What skills can you put into action to nourish resilience? Resilience is usually understood as a process and the outcome of successfully adapting to challenging life experiences. These days, we are exposed to all types of external stressors. That's the norm and not the exception. We may struggle learning how to deal with a world that moves fast, a world that pressures us in many directions, and a world in which hundreds of things are outside of our control. Today, I have the honor of interviewing Dennis Relojo-Howell, and he kindly shares with us the ways in which he became resilient and different ways to nourish it. Dennis is a social entrepreneur, speaker, and resilience researcher. He is originally born in Philippines, and in 2014 he founded Psychreg. Psychreg is an award-winning media project dedicated to keeping everyone informed about psychology, mental health, and wellness. In this conversation, Dennis shared how he learned to pursue what matters in the midst of all social stressors, how he uses creative writing as a resilience practice, how he managed the stress of growing up in a stressful environment. I hope you find this episode helpful, and feel free to reach out at www.thisisdrz.com. I would love to hear from you. I wish you a great week. Bye-bye.
I don't know if this is the kind of answer that you and your listeners are expecting, but I fear about the death of my loved ones. Mm-hmm. And the way I reconcile with that fear is that I try to acknowledge people's mortality and my own mortality. Mm-hmm. And by acknowledging everyone's mortality, I begin to be more appreciative of the time left with my loved ones. So that's my greatest fear.
If I can ask a little bit more about that, do you remember how this fear started?
I suppose when I lost my uncle when I was 15, and I've seen that how my niece and how my cousin, like grew up without a dad, because we lost our uncle when he was just 30, so it's such a very young age to lose a father for my cousin. So I was just thinking, like, how about me when it's my turn, like without something morbid, how am I gonna feel, how am I gonna survive when the time comes that, of course it will come, the time comes that I will lose my parents. Fortunately, I still have my parents now. I still have my parents up to this point, but I know eventually it will come, because like, parents are mortal. We would all lose our parents, but I think Yeah, that fear, like what I've said, I begin to, I begin to come to grips with it, I suppose.
You know, I think that in this life, we travel with so many fears. Fears about people that we love pass away, fear of not being good enough, fear of being a failure. And sometimes we naturally manage these fears skillfully, but most of the times we don't. Most of the times we spend hours and hours ruminating in our head, or we start anticipating doom and gloom scenarios. How was for you? How did you reach a place in which you resolve that fear in a way that helps you to keep doing the things that are important to you?
I think that best way to answer that would be to introduce to you another fear. I also fear about not fulfilling other people's expectation, because I'm a content creator. So if you will, it's sort of a public facing role. So when I launched my channel, my YouTube channel, where I actually interviewed Dr. Z, I was so hesitant. I was so fearful of how people would, react. Until now, I still get lots of comments that I don't usually, comments that don't usually make me feel good about what I'm doing. And how did I get through it? How did I navigate it? You just realize that actually this is part of what you're doing. Being a content creator comes with a lot of criticism, so you just have to accept that it's part of the process. So I'm telling myself that, if I don't want to receive any criticism, then perhaps I should not have chosen this path. I should not have decided to be a content creator. And that also applies to other aspects of, what I'm doing. So for instance, I'm currently a PhD student, so that comes with a lot of stress. And I also fear that my work as a PhD student also gets criticized a lot. That's part of the process. So yeah, just to answer your question, I just have to accept the fact that whatever criticisms that I receive on whatever things that I chose to do, it's part of the process. I just have to acknowledge that.
That's very thoughtful of you. And it's hard when someone is telling us, oh, this is not good, you could have done this. It's hard not to take it personal, especially when you are a content creator. I think our internal experiences can be much more manageable when we radically accept what we're feeling, what we are sensing, and what our mind is coming up with. Even when I am saying that, I think it's very hard to do so. And sometimes we coach ourselves in the moment when we're perceiving some criticism. But how do you manage to not wrestle with those thoughts and to not take them personal? That is a reflection of who you are in the world.
Yes. The another thing that I find effective is I try to detach myself from the things that I do. So usually weekends is just me time. So I try not to engage on anything related to my PhD or related to my content creation. I just tell myself, without sounding cheesy, is that there's life beyond content creation and there's life beyond PhD. So it's not all about those things. I have my husband, so I spend time doing things that we enjoy together. We love traveling. So, just kind of reframe it that it's not all about content creation. It's not all about PhD. And, the people criticize you for just a tiny fraction of what they see, of what they know about you. They don't know that you also have other aspects of your life. And just like those people who criticize you, you have your family, you have other interests, and you have other things that you also want to do with your life.
So having that separation has been helpful for you. And now let me switch gears a little bit. When you and I thought about having this conversation, one of the things you say in your email was, let's chat about resilience. So how do you think about resilience these days?
Okay. I see resilience as more of a skill. It's something that we can develop. It's something that we can cultivate if we are given the right intervention, if we are given the right support system. And that actually goes against with what you would come across on resilience literature, because a lot of researchers do not really agree whether resilience is a process, is it a genetic trait, or is it an outcome, or is it, does everybody have it? But I'd like to think of resilience as something that we can cultivate. We're not born with resilience, but we can cultivate it. That's how I see resilience. And also another thing that we think of resilience when we hear it is that resilience is resilient people are superhuman, or that they are sort of like unicorn. I'd like to consider resilient people as something more of squirrels. They're everywhere, they're not like unicorns that it's difficult to find them. We might be encountering different trauma, different adversities, but at one point in our life, we have demonstrated the ability to bounce back, the ability to be resilient. And that's how I see resilience.
I absolutely love that frame, because like you, I agree that resilience is a skill that can be cultivated, can be nourished. And I think it's also related to a person's capacity to handle stress, how they deal with the stressful events, with the stuff that happens outside of our control. If you think of resilience as a skill, what are the ways in which people can cultivate it? So people who are listening to us, given all the stressors that we're living at the global level, what would you encourage them to do or to practice to cultivate resilience as a skill?
As a PhD student, I'm looking for ways on how we can cultivate resilience. And there are many approaches, there are many interventions that we could boost our levels of resilience. And one thing that I'm particularly interested is how we can develop resilience through self-expression, in particular through, because I'm a content creator, in particular blogging. Can we actually use blogging as a form of self-expression to teach people how to be resilient? And it's this is actually this kind of intervention predates the internet. So some of your listeners might probably come across of James Pennebaker, who actually introduced the notion of expressive writing. Just to give a bit of a background, what James Pennebaker said is that if we give people an opportunity to express themselves through writing, it can provide a range of psychological benefits. And I want to tap into that finding. And I'm thinking that with the internet age, perhaps we could put a bit of modern twist with the expressive writing introduced by James Pennebaker. And so I'm looking at, could we also use blogging as a way to cultivate resilience? And of course, it's not just through self-expression that we can cultivate resilience. A lot of research has also demonstrated that if we have a good support system, that could also increase our levels of resilience. I'm so fortunate because growing up, I was surrounded with a lot of people who has been supportive of what I want to do with my life, especially my parents and my teachers. And so if you could find those instrumental people that could lead you on how to be more resilient, I think that would be very beneficial. You can add them to your resilience portfolio, shall we say.
I love the idea of that resilience portfolio. I love it. Let me go back a little bit. If people want to try some creative writing to cultivate resilience as a skill,
Mhm.
What will you encourage them to do? Is there any process you encourage them to follow through?
Yeah, yes. So forget about the grammar, forget about the spelling, just pour out your thoughts on a piece of paper. I still have my journal because I'm introverted. I just love growing up. I prefer my own company, and I still have my journal as a 9-year-old. I'm 40 now, so you can imagine my collection of journals. I still have them to this day.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah. And sometimes it doesn't have to be just writing, you can just draw, or you can just paint, and those are forms of self-expression. And there's something about those, snapshot of your emotions, snapshots of your feelings at a given time. When you look back to them, like I'm 40 now, and then when I look up my writing when I was 18, I was just like, did I really write that? And I was trying to remember, I'm trying to reimagine how I was feeling during that time. Because obviously when you were 18, you see the world in a different way. But when you're 40, perhaps it comes with age. You're a bit more mature, you're a bit more wise. So you have to decide who is it for, and what's the purpose of your self-expression.
That's very helpful to hear how you have been writing for quite a while. And it's true. I think our lenses to understand ourselves and our history and what's happening changes as we keep moving in life. During the pandemic, I remember I grabbed Julia Cameron's journal, and she has some prompts for writing. And there were different prompts, like think about one of your sweetest memories when you were a teenager, or different things. Will you encourage people to use a prompt, or will you encourage them to do free writing?
Personally, I would just do free writing. I'm launching a global resilience blog, so I'm trialing it first with young people in Southeast Asian country. And for my research project, I actually have prompts, and the reason for that is my participants, I would imagine that they haven't tried writing, they haven't tried blogging, so it's good to have structure. So for my prompt, I'm using actually what they think about their mental health during the pandemic, because it's something that would trigger a lot of insights, a lot of memories. And also I would also prompt them about what they think about resilience and what they think about self-expression. The name of the project is called Psychreg Resilience Project. And just to give a bit of background, Psychreg, because it's the name of my blog.
That's right.
So I decided to do a PhD, and the main output of my PhD is to launch a resilience intervention, which is backed by modern psychology. So I'll be trialing out my resilience intervention with different groups of young people in 3 Southeast Asian countries, in Philippines, in Malaysia, and then in Thailand. And ultimately, the trial would inform how the blog intervention should look like in the future. And I aim to make this resilience intervention be accessible to a wider group of population, not just with young people in Southeast Asian country. So without boring you to the details, so the first part was I was talking with young people in Philippines what they think about resilience. And I also talked to them what they think about blogging as an intervention, and it's quite a mixed result. Predominantly, they think about resilience as something embedded within the culture. And when it comes to blogging, they're a bit hesitant whether to use blogging or whether it would encourage them to use a resilience intervention if it's blog based. So I'm trying to explore what they think about it. And I don't know if my Malaysian participants would also think the same, just like my Filipino participants. But yeah, it's quite an interesting result.
And I will provide the link to everyone listening to us. Is that okay if I ask a little bit more?
Sure, absolutely.
You mentioned something that really caught my attention. You mentioned that when you were interviewing young people in the Philippines about resilience, you hear that some of them believe that it's embedded in the culture. This may sound obvious to you, so my apologies for that question, but what do they mean by that? What were they referring to?
Okay, because if you live in the Philippines, there's this stereotypical notion that you have to be resilient, otherwise you won't survive in the Philippines. Just to contextualize it, so in Philippines, we have about 16 typhoons in a year. And these are not just, like typhoons. I remember, because I grew up in a slum in the Philippines, and every monsoon season, every June, July, August, a house in the slum would get flooded by about 8 feet. So every year, a house in the slum would be submerged 8 feet. And my experience is not unique. A lot of young people experience that. And not only that, you would also experience earthquake, because we are in the Pacific Ring of Fire. When I was in the Philippines, the first earthquake that I experienced was when I was 6 years old. And that earthquake killed about, if I remember it, like about 5,000 people. And the earthquake lasted for just a few seconds. So at a young age, I realized that this is a tough environment to live, like literally. And because I spent my childhood in a slum in the Philippines, I've been exposed to a lot of violence without being too graphic, and my experience is not unique. So when I was talking to young people as part of my research project, they also have their own personal accounts of experiences that requires resilience, that requires you to be emotionally tough. And so that's where the expression that resilience is embedded within the culture, because there are two things, when it comes to catastrophic events. There are two F's that compels you to be resilient in the Philippines. First is frequency, and second is fatalism, because Philippines is a very Catholic country. And I suppose I'm not religious myself, but I was like every Filipino, I was brought up a Catholic, and they're very religious. And I suppose religion has a function, because you just attribute it to someone higher than you. You just say that perhaps there's a reason for this volcanic eruption, perhaps there's a reason for this earthquake, there's a reason for this typhoon. It's God's will. And without attributing it to a higher being, you become diminished as a person. You get lost with all you're experiencing. And so whether it's religion or whether it's something else, it's just part of the Filipino culture.
Thank you for sharing that. It's a very different mindset. If I can ask a little bit more, in the 90s, there were some research papers looking at the impact of religious beliefs on how people manage depressive symptoms, how people manage anxiety-based struggles. And I can see why for some people, when there is awful natural conditions like earthquakes and people dying, or there is violence around you, when you think about faith and you think that perhaps there is a meaning to that, in some way may reduce the distress that you're experiencing through. But what happens for those people that they don't have that religious belief? In your case, how did you handle distress? You say, I'm not a religious person. So given that you grew up with that, and that was the environment that you were exposed to, how did you become resilient without the support of faith?
Yeah, without faith, there's other outlets that I could tap into. Those were my parents, and those were my teachers. And I suppose you also draw inspiration from people who have experienced far more serious adversity than you. When I was a child, I draw inspiration from people who survived the Holocaust. You know, like I haven't experienced Holocaust myself, but I was just thinking, like, if I've been into that situation, how do I actually move on? How do I navigate life? And I was telling myself that if people could actually, you know, surmount that experience, I should be able to surmount typhoon. I should be able to surmount growing up in a tough neighborhood. And also I'm thinking that my situation is actually slightly better than what other people have experienced. You know, like imagine, I remember there was this guy in the Philippines. Your listeners might want to Google him. His name is, I forgot his first name, but his surname is Visconde. So Vizconde, Visconde. Just Google it, Visconde massacre. So basically, this is about a guy working overseas. And then one day he received a news that all of his family members were massacred. Yeah, his wife and his daughters were killed. But in spite of that, he has demonstrated resilience. He has demonstrated the courage to carry on living. It was only a few years ago that he died. But I was just like thinking that if that happened to me, would I still have the reason to leave? You remember earlier this conversation, I told you that one of my greatest fear is facing the death of a loved one. Imagine that, you know, like you're working for your family and just one day, all of them were dead, you know, like violent death. I don't know if I could survive that, but Mr. Visconti has demonstrated what I would call resilience. So I don't have religious faith. I have spiritual faith. I don't have religious faith. And so in lieu of religious faith, I'm drawing inspiration from people who have done better than me. And I think Visconde, Mr. Visconde, but those kind of people have become a source of inspiration.
It's fascinating you're sharing that. So in some way, looking at how others handle awful events in their life gave you the inspiration to say that you can do this. It gives you some perspective and gives you the courage to find reasons to keep going.
Yeah, absolutely.
I personally hold the belief that humans were wired to thrive, and we are fighters and we are survivors. And I also think that that's hard at times. For example, for me as an immigrant, as a woman, as a person that has an accent, there were times in which I felt like giving up. And I feel super grateful, like you, that I met some people that never gave up on me. They saw some value to what I was doing. And when I was close to give up, they didn't let me do so. Not hundreds of people, but few of them key people. So how was for you? Did you ever have some moments in which you doubt yourself? In which even though you knew that if others did it, I can do it, still it was hard to do so. Did you experience moments like that?
Yes, I do experience those things, but just slightly off tangent about your accent, because I also have an accent. I always, you know, like I always tell people the reason why I have accent is because I can speak more than one language.
Lovely.
Like, English, yeah. When people ask me like, you have an accent, yes, because English is my fourth language. But anyway,
I love it. I love it. I will keep that in my mind.
Yeah.
Thank you.
There are reasons that I feel like giving up, and without sounding melodramatic, because I spent my childhood in a slum in the Philippines. You know, I grew up without no running water. There was no electricity. I did not even sleep in an actual bed until I was about 16. So there are a lot of things that I thought I won't be able to achieve. And one of them is going to university. I thought that going to university is not something of people of my background, you know, because my parents, I'm the first in the family, first in the generation to go to university. So going to university was just like, you know, like my generation's dreams, you know, like it might not have been a big deal for people, but when I went to university, I was like, I'm doing this for my parents because they did not have the opportunity to go to university. It took me a long time to finish university, you know, like usually in Philippines, you should be able to finish your degree in 4 years, but it took me 6 years to finish university. So I was just like, can I really do this? Because I'm a very average student. So that was one of the moments in my life that I was like, is this really for me? But I was just like, you know what, like going to university is far, far easy if I'm going to compare what my parents were doing when they were on the, you know, when they were 18. Because when my parents were 18, they were fruit pickers, they were picking fruits. And I was telling myself, I'm 18 and I'm going to university. I have a far, far more, you know, comfortable life compared to my parents. So I should be able to do that. So that kept me going. Another is that I felt like giving up when I first moved in here in the UK. Because just like you, I'm an immigrant. And if you're an immigrant, you know, like I first came into this country with just like most immigrants. I first came into this country with just 2 luggage and 100 pounds. So
the feeling.
Yeah, literally you have to start from scratch. Yeah, because way back then I was an international student. I don't know anyone. I don't speak the language very well. And it's a completely different system. And a year after I finished my degree, I couldn't find a job, you know, because when you finish your degree, you're kind of disillusioned. I've got a master's degree because I came here as a master's student. I've got a master's degree. I should be able to just, you know, get a job. I couldn't find a job. I tried, you know, things which academically I'm overqualified, but I'm willing to do that. But for the first 4 years of my life, I was just so devastated when I was here. Like I couldn't find a job that matches my academic training. And but eventually I found, you know, I found a way of earning using my academic training. And so that kind of regained my confidence again.
How did you find that? How did you find the new way of keep going?
How did I suppose I owe it to my husband. So Graham, if you're listening, I'm giving you credit. I owe it to my husband because it's been very supportive. I remember when for our first year of marriage, I told him, because my first year of marriage, I still couldn't find a job. I told him that I couldn't find a job. Should we just move to Philippines? Because I said, like, before I came into this country, I was a university lecturer. I told him that if I just go back to Philippines with my master's degree, I could just walk to a university and get a job. But it's not the same here. I was just like, no, just stick to it. And my husband has been one of my, you know, motivational voice. He's one of my biggest cheerleaders. And so I benefited from his motivation.
It's beautiful that you have that support, that you were able to find that inspiration with him and through him. And I'm sure that when he listens this interview, he's going to have a smile on his face because they're giving him credit. I love it. Another thought or other types of thoughts that sometimes come into our mind when you're creating, when you are trying to keep moving in life is comparison thoughts. We compare ourselves with others. What do you do when your mind compares what you are doing, your performance, your accomplishments with others' accomplishments or others' achievements?
Okay. Well, when you compare yourself, you have to contextualize it. You know, like you have to think about upward comparison and you have to think about downward comparison. So you have to think, am I really successful YouTuber? Compared me to, let's say, Joe Rogan. I'm nothing. Like my number of subscribers is not even 1% of Joe Rogan's number of subscribers.
Well, Joe Rogan is a different beast, right?
Yeah.
A different, like, I think,
Yeah.
sorry, Joe Rogan, but
Yeah.
he lives in a different universe, right? I don't know what he does, but no.
Yeah, so that's the thing about comparison. You have to compare yourself to something that is really, like the same background, the same effort, the same starting point, shall we say.
Okay.
So you have to be, how do I say it? You have to respect your effort, what you're doing. So instead of comparing yourself to someone like Joe Rogan, I'm not going to compare myself with Joe Rogan, because if I'm going to compare myself with Joe Rogan, I feel such a failure, because I would be like, I'm putting a lot of efforts with my content creation, but why am I not like Joe Rogan? But I have to acknowledge that I don't have the same resources as Joe Rogan, like his technical abilities, or probably he's got a staff, he's got team. I don't have that resources. So when you compare yourself, avoid doing upward comparison. And also, it's not also good that you're comparing yourself with downward comparison. You're comparing yourself to someone who hasn't got a YouTube channel. Just be realistic, with comparison. We hear it a lot of time when people say that try to avoid comparison, but it's really difficult to do that, because we live in an era where it's so accessible to, it's so accessible to compare yourself with other people. And I also tell myself that I'm not good at certain things, and I'm not good at certain things, and that's just part of who I am. You have to acknowledge your limitations. One thing that really frustrates me the most is I never learned how to drive. Like I'm the only one in the family who hasn't learned how to drive. I put a lot of effort into it. I had 7 driving instructors, believe it or not, but I never learned how to drive. And I'm not going to compare myself with my niece, like who can drive when she was on her 20s, because that will just make me feel bad. I just have to acknowledge that even though I don't know how to drive, that did not really limit me in going to places where I want to go.
I love how you came into a place of accepting who you are. Like you, I agree that our mind will naturally compare. We'll compare ourselves with others, with relatives, with other content creators. I think evolutionarily speaking, those comparison thoughts kept us alive. It just happens that they're not very effective all the time. And here is my last question. Dennis, if you were to have a cup of tea or coffee or a beer or a scotch with any person you want today, who will that be and why?
I probably would love to have a cup of tea with Dr. Jordan Peterson. I'm a big fan of Dr. Jordan Peterson. I've actually read his book, Rules for Life. And I would love to talk more about his book and talk more about his insights. I'll probably have more than 1 cup of tea.
I bet. Thanks for listening. If you like this episode, I will very much appreciate it if you will subscribe and share this podcast with your friends. And if you're feeling extra generous, I welcome a review on Apple Podcasts. Show notes of this episode are in the website playingitsafe.zone. Make sure to subscribe to my newsletter so you can receive more tips to stop all types of unworkable playing it safe actions. See you soon!